Hi everyone, and thank you for attending this presentation. My name is Stephen Hall, and I'm a registered nurse and Master of Nursing student at the University of Saskatchewan. Today I'm going to be presenting our work entitled The Caregiver Experience, Gathering Perspectives and Setting Priorities for Caregiver Support in Saskatchewan. This project was crafted in partnership with the Saskatoon Council on Aging and was generously supported by Preston Park retirement residents. With Canada's aging population, there's a growing need for informal caregivers to help care for older adults. We sought to understand what existed in Saskatchewan to help support caregivers in their role, and what caregivers need and want in terms of support. We had two specific research questions. Our first question was, how does caregiver intervention programming differ in Saskatchewan from the rest of Canada? Our second research question was, what do the experiences of caregivers have to offer in terms of setting priorities for caregiver support? An environmental scan showed that Saskatchewan had much room for growth in terms of caregiver support, as you can see from the highlighted column in the middle of this poster. Therefore, the next step of this project was to see what caregivers in Saskatchewan actually wanted for support. We held two focus groups with a total of 33 attendants. Our data was sorted into 4 themes. The first theme was entitled Lack of Access. Our participants shared that there was a lack of access to clear and concise information, respite, and financial assistance. When our care recipients were admitted to hospital, they had greater accessibility to resources that were seemingly hiding in the community. Lack of access to finances was a hot topic as well. For example, the ability to afford care in a retirement residence or a long-term care facility was a concern for many of the caregiver participants. Caregivers who also don't live with their care recipients talked about the financial burden of travel and transportation. Conflict with self and others was our second theme. Conflict with self is how we conceptualize the caregiver's internal conflict, which included feelings of guilt and inadequacy. One caregiver stated, "Am I doing it right?" Balancing the needs of the care recipient and those of the caregiver were also conflicts that were mentioned. Conflict with others sparked the idea of primary versus secondary caregivers. The participants echoed stories from one another about struggling with family members who live out of town. It was described that external family members, or secondary caregivers, were often not supportive of the primary caregiver. For example, the daughter who cares for the mother 7 days a week versus the son who lives out of town and sees the mother once a month. Both of them would have different experiences with the care recipient, and the secondary caregiver often didn't have a true picture of the care recipient's health status. Primary caregivers ultimately felt as though they were bearing the full burden. Which brings us to a third theme, entitled The Burden of Caregiving, which involved isolation and neglect for self-care. Those with lack of support from family and friends felt overwhelmed, alone, and abandoned. Caregivers also struggled with giving oneself permission to engage in self-care, which involved them giving up things that they like to do. Declining health and wellness was our fourth and final theme. This theme came from two distinct points that arose in the group discussion: the progressive decline of the care recipient and the functional decline of the caregiver. One caregiver noted that her care recipient would often call late at night for help with small tasks like fixing the television remote. These types of actions would lead to less sleep and higher anxiety in the caregiver, which related to the caregiver's functional decline. Caregivers realized their own physiologic process of aging. Quotes that were recorded were, "I'm getting old too, and I'm tired all of the time." An interesting point of discussion was that caregivers also noted there was a concern with physical strength and ability to assist with transferring, lifting, and repositioning their care recipient, or helping in emergencies, such as in cases of falls. Overall, caregivers reported feeling worn out, not receiving enough sleep, and not taking adequate care of their own chronic conditions. Participants offered opinions on what they thought was most important for programming caregiver interventions in Saskatchewan. They recommended moderated online forums, live discussions with other caregivers and trained staff, and regular caregiver meetings. Emotional and informational support were the two types of support that participants recommended prioritizing. Educational opportunities, including seminars and workshops, were also a popular suggestion. Lastly, respite in the form of a break for a couple hours a week, or organized retreats for self-care activities were recommended as high priorities. Our results indicate what caregivers in Saskatchewan want from support interventions. I am proud to share that these results have already been used in a handful of grant applications, and just last week, an $8,000 grant from the Kinsman Club was awarded to the Saskatoon Council on Aging to help expand caregiver support in our province. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. Stay well and take care.